Emily sat at the small kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring the spoon through her bowl of cereal. The kitchen was modest, with faded cabinets and chipped mugs lining the countertop. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise over the sleepy town, casting a soft golden light through the window. She could hear the sound of birds chirping, a sound that had always felt comforting to her, part of the predictable rhythm of life in her small town. Everything around her felt like it belonged to another time, a quieter era where things were simpler, and life moved slowly. Her mother was already up, bustling around the kitchen, her movements efficient but tired. Emily watched her, noting the deep lines etched around her mother's eyes, the exhaustion that seemed to hang over her, even on the most ordinary of days. Emily's younger brother, Jake, was still asleep upstairs, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to close her eyes and pretend that everything was fine. She let the mundane comfort of this morning routine settle around her, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic providing a familiar soundtrack to her life. Despite the outward calm of her family's life, Emily knew that there was something about her that didn't quite fit the world she lived in. At least, not the way others might expect. She had learned to hide it, her gift, or perhaps curse, depending on how she looked at it. Since she was young, Emily had known that she had the ability to heal. She couldn't explain how it worked, but when people around her were injured, sick, or in pain, she could feel it in her own body. It wasn't as if she could simply will them better, there was no magic to it, no dramatic transformation. But somehow, when she placed her hands over an injury or wound, it would heal faster. Her mother's sprained wrist would become less swollen after Emily gently touched it. A bruise on Jake's leg would fade in a matter of hours, not days. Even cuts and scrapes would close up more quickly when Emily concentrated on them. The problem was that Emily didn't know how to control it fully. She had never been taught what it really was or how to refine the skill. It felt strange and unpredictable, like something she should keep hidden. In a town like theirs, where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened, the idea of having a gift, something so unusual, was terrifying. She feared being labeled, judged, or worse, ridiculed. Emily had always been careful not to let anyone know what she could do. It was easier that way. Her quiet confidence allowed her to blend in with the crowd, to live a life that seemed ordinary to everyone around her. At the local store where she worked part-time, she kept to herself, greeting customers with the same polite smile she wore every day. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The owners of the store were kind, treating her like a part of the family, and Emily was grateful for the stability they provided. The few friends she had in town didn't know anything about her abilities. They saw Emily as the shy, thoughtful girl who liked to read and spend time alone. And she was content with that. After all, it wasn't like she had much else to offer. But deep down, Emily longed to do more, to help others in a way that went beyond a simple good deed or a kind word. She wished she could heal the people who needed it, to take away their pain. But she was afraid. Afraid of the consequences, afraid of what might happen if she failed, and afraid that her gift might not be as helpful as she hoped. Her mother's voice pulled Emily from her thoughts. "Emily, could you grab the medicine from the cupboard?" she asked, her voice slightly strained, though she tried to hide it. Emily's mother had been sick for a while, her health slowly deteriorating over the past few months. It started with a cough, then came the fever, and now there were days when Emily would wake up to find her mother barely able to get out of bed. But despite her worsening condition, Emily's mother refused to go to the doctor. She didn't want to burden anyone, didn't want to be a problem to the people in town. The doctors, when they had been consulted, couldn't find anything specific. They just called it a viral infection, nothing to worry about, though her mother's health seemed to be growing weaker with each passing week. Emily knew it was more than that. She could see the way her mother's body seemed to fade each day, the way she struggled to smile or laugh, the way she couldn't seem to stay awake for long. But what could she do? She was just Emily, an ordinary girl who worked at a store and hid her strange gift from the world. It was on one particularly difficult evening, when her mother collapsed from exhaustion, that Emily's life changed forever. Her mother had been bedridden for days, too weak to even sit up on her own. Emily had been beside her the entire time, trying to help, trying to comfort her. But that night, something was different. Her mother's breathing became shallow, ragged, and Emily could feel the weight of the sickness pressing down on her mother's chest. The doctors had already given up. They said there was nothing more they could do. It was just a matter of time. That was when Emily knew. She could save her mother. She had to try. But the fear was overwhelming. What if it didn't work? What if she couldn't heal her? And what if someone found out? What would they say? Emily's hands trembled as she sat beside her mother's bed, her heart racing. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her mind, to focus. She had healed before, but never someone so close to her. Never someone whose life depended on it. In that moment, Emily made a choice. She didn't care about the consequences anymore. She didn't care about what people might think. Her mother was everything to her, and she couldn't just sit there and watch her die. She gently placed her hands on her mother's chest, her fingers trembling as she concentrated, willing the warmth from her hands to enter her mother's body. She focused on the way her mother's body had once been strong and full of life. Emily imagined the illness being pushed away, her mother's lungs expanding freely once more. The hours that followed felt like a blur. Emily didn't know how long she sat there, her hands pressed against her mother's chest, but when she finally opened her eyes, she saw something remarkable. Her mother's breathing had steadied. Her skin, once pale and ashen, had taken on a healthier hue. Slowly, her mother's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in weeks, there was a spark of recognition in them. Emily knew, in that moment, that her life was about to change forever. She had stepped into a world where nothing would ever feel the same again. And though fear still gnawed at her, there was something else, too: hope. For the first time, she realized that maybe she wasn't just ordinary. Maybe she had the power to do more than she had ever imagined. Emily stood in the center of the town square, her heart pounding in her chest as the murmurs of the gathered crowd washed over her. She had never felt more exposed, yet in this moment, she couldn't take back what she had said. The words had already left her lips, "I can heal my mother," and now they hung in the air like an impossible promise, echoing in her ears and the ears of everyone around her. She had hoped, naively, that the announcement would spark hope in the community, that people would rally around her and her mother, but instead, she felt the weight of skepticism pressing down on her from every side. The town's authorities were particularly vocal in their disbelief. Judge Harrington, a man whose stern face and sharp tongue had intimidated many for as long as Emily could remember, was the first to speak. His booming laugh cut through the tension like a knife. "Heal your mother? You're a child, Emily. What do you know of healing?" He scoffed, shaking his head as though the idea was too ridiculous to entertain. "You'll only end up disappointing yourself, and worse, your mother." His words stung more than she had expected, each syllable striking at her already fragile confidence. She had never been sure of her powers, never fully understood them, really, but she had believed, deep down, that they were real. Her mother's condition had worsened over the past few months, and Emily had felt the growing urge to do something, to use whatever strange abilities had begun to manifest in her to save the woman who had always protected her. But now, standing in front of a crowd of skeptical faces, Emily felt small, as if the hope she had held so tightly was crumbling into dust. Around her, people exchanged doubtful glances. Some whispered to each other, others shook their heads in disbelief. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, the judgment in their gazes heavy and suffocating. The whispers grew louder, and she could make out bits of their conversation. Is she crazy? She's just trying to get attention. How could she possibly think she can heal her mother? Her heart ached as the weight of their doubt settled deeper into her chest. Emily's eyes moved instinctively to her mother, who stood a few feet away, her face pale and drawn, her body frail from the relentless illness that had consumed her for so long. She was the reason Emily was doing this impossible thing, this thing that could tear her apart if it failed. But seeing her mother, the woman who had given so much of herself for Emily's sake, only deepened the resolve in Emily's heart. If she couldn't heal her mother, who could she heal? But at the same time, the nagging question kept creeping into her thoughts, what if I can't? The judge's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. I suggest you leave these fantasies behind, Emily. You're only going to make things worse for yourself and for your poor mother. His tone was patronizing, as though he was addressing a child who had outgrown a phase of make-believe. The crowd laughed, and Emily's face flushed. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every doubt and insecurity she had ever carried was being laid bare for all to see. She had never wanted attention like this. She had never wanted to be thrust into the center of the community's gaze. She just wanted to help her mother. But the pressure, the crushing weight of their disbelief was beginning to take its toll. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to spill over, but she blinked them away, trying to maintain control. I can't let them see me break, she thought. She couldn't let this public rejection defeat her before she had even begun. Taking a deep breath, Emily forced herself to stand taller, pushing back against the gnawing fear that threatened to paralyze her. She had to defend herself. She had to defend her mother. She had to make them understand that what she felt was real. I'm not lying, she said, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. I can heal her. I don't know how, don't know why, but I can feel it, inside me. Every day, I feel something growing, something that wants to help her. I can't explain it, but I know it's real. And I will try. I will try, whether you believe me or not. There was a moment of stunned silence before the murmurs began again, this time with a hint of mockery. The judge's laughter was the loudest, ringing out in a way that made Emily's heart sink. Such determination for a girl who doesn't know the first thing about what she's claiming. You'll get nowhere with this nonsense. The words hit her like a slap. She had expected doubt, but the cold derision in his voice felt like a direct assault on her very being. Was she a fool for trying to believe? Was this some child's fantasy she was chasing? She wanted to turn and run, to escape this nightmare of rejection and humiliation, but she couldn't. She couldn't give up, not when her mother was depending on her. For a brief, agonizing moment, Emily began to question everything. What if they're right? What if I'm just a girl with dreams too big for reality? Her powers had always been strange, difficult to control, and never guaranteed. She had healed small injuries before, but could she heal something so much bigger? What if, in the end, she was only setting herself up for failure? What if she couldn't save her mother after all? The weight of these doubts pressed down on her chest, threatening to crush her resolve. But then, she glanced at her mother once more. Her face was so pale, her body so weak. The hollow look in her eyes tore at Emily's heart. She wouldn't give up. "I don't care what you think," Emily said, her voice steadier now, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm doing this for her. Because I can, and because I believe I can." The crowd fell silent. The judge's face was unreadable, his gaze sharp and critical, but for the first time, Emily didn't care. She had said what she needed to say, and though doubt still clouded her mind, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let the fear of failure hold her back. The weight of the world might be pressing down on her, but in this moment, Emily made a decision. She would heal her mother. She would prove them all wrong, or at the very least, try with everything she had. And that was enough. Emily stood at the edge of the small, cluttered room, her hands trembling as she prepared for her first attempt to heal her mother. The quiet stillness of the space was suffocating, each moment pregnant with the weight of expectation. Her mother lay on the bed, her once vibrant face now pale and gaunt, a shadow of the woman she had been just months before. Despite the failing health that consumed her, there was a flicker of hope in Emily's heart, the faintest spark that maybe, just maybe, this would work. But as she began, the murmurs of doubt that had been swirling in the back of her mind became increasingly loud, echoing with each breath she took. The town had been watching, waiting for something to happen. Word had spread quickly about Emily's unconventional approach, the methods she claimed could heal, though no one understood exactly how. Some people whispered about her miraculous abilities, believing in her from the start. They had seen the quiet desperation in her eyes, the intense determination that radiated from her whenever she spoke of saving her mother. A small but vocal group of supporters began to rally around her, offering quiet words of encouragement. Yet, just as quickly, a much louder voice had begun to rise in opposition, those who deemed her efforts nothing more than dangerous charlatanism. The judge, a staunch skeptic of anything that defied traditional beliefs, was the loudest of the critics. He had long been a pillar of authority in the town, respected and feared in equal measure, and he saw Emily's methods as a direct challenge to the established order. To him, there was no place for such nonsense in the town. He mocked Emily publicly, ridiculing her attempts to heal with words that dripped with disdain. He called her actions reckless, warned that she was preying on the vulnerable, and demanded she prove herself in a public demonstration. "If you truly believe in your abilities, Emily," the judge's voice rang out across the town square one afternoon, "then show us. Perform for the people. Let them see this supposed miracle of yours." The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown at Emily's feet. The weight of it was overwhelming. She had no idea how to prove what she claimed, how to demonstrate something so intangible, so personal. How could she make others believe in something she barely understood herself? The pressure was unbearable, and yet, there was no way to back down. Her mother's condition continued to deteriorate. This was her only chance. As the days passed, the town became increasingly divided. The debate raged through the streets, spilling into homes and businesses. Some people saw Emily as a savior, a beacon of hope in a town that had long been bogged down by routine and resignation. Others saw her as a fraud, a dangerous young woman playing with forces she could not comprehend. The whispers grew louder, and soon, the media arrived, their cameras and microphones capturing every moment of her attempts, every misstep, every challenge. The spotlight on Emily intensified, and with it came a new set of pressures: legal scrutiny, judgment from experts, and constant threats from those who feared the unknown. The medical community, in particular, came down hard on her methods. Experts, some of whom had studied medicine for decades, declared her actions reckless. You can't simply will someone to health, they argued. There's no science behind what she's doing. She's unqualified and dangerous. The criticism was not just dismissive, it was often vicious. Some physicians openly called for her to be arrested for practicing medicine without a license, while others threatened to take legal action against her if anything went wrong. Emily found herself at the center of a storm, one that was beginning to swallow her whole. Everywhere she turned, there were new obstacles. The media followed her relentlessly, cameras capturing every moment, amplifying the voices of both her supporters and her critics. The judge, who had demanded she prove herself, began using his influence to stir the pot further, calling for a public spectacle, an event where Emily would either succeed or be humiliated before the entire town. With each passing day, the pressure mounted. Emily could feel the weight of it on her shoulders, the eyes of the town bearing down on her, scrutinizing every word she said, every action she took. But it wasn't just the external pressure that was beginning to crack her resolve, it was the growing fear inside her that maybe she couldn't do it. Maybe she couldn't heal her mother. Maybe she couldn't heal anyone at all. She had always believed that she had some gift, something unique inside her, but now, with all the attention and all the judgment, that belief was starting to unravel. What if this wasn't real? What if she was just fooling herself, grasping at straws, unable to truly make a difference? Every time she stood over her mother, hands hovering in the air, every time she whispered the words she hoped would carry power, the fear inside her grew. The fear that she would fail. The fear that the town was right, that she was not special, that she had no powers, and that the pain of failure would only bring more humiliation than she could bear. Her supporters, who had once been so vocal, were starting to dwindle. They, too, were beginning to question whether there was any truth to her abilities. They had faith in her, but even they could not ignore the mounting pressure. The judge, the media, the growing legal and medical opposition, it was all becoming too much. Emily could see it in their eyes, they were torn between their loyalty to her and their own fear of being associated with failure. And then there was the judge, whose taunts and mockery had only become more frequent and cutting. He called for her to prove herself, not behind closed doors, but in front of the entire town, on a grand stage where she would either rise to the occasion or be crushed under the weight of their collective skepticism. If you can heal, Emily, then do it in front of all of us, he demanded, his voice loud and unwavering. Let the world see what you can do. If you fail, then you will be nothing more than a joke. If you succeed, then maybe, just maybe, you'll have earned your place among the people. The public nature of the judge's demand was a final blow to Emily's already fragile confidence. It was no longer just about healing her mother, it was about saving herself from the ridicule that threatened to consume her. The stakes were no longer just personal, they were public, with everyone watching, everyone waiting for her to either prove her worth or fall apart. Emily's mind became a battlefield. She longed to give up, to step away from the pressure and the ridicule, to escape the suffocating judgment that surrounded her. But there was something deeper that kept her from walking away. It was her mother. It was the love she felt for her, the hope that this was the key, the one thing that could save her. But as the weight of the world pressed down on her, Emily found herself torn between the fear of failure and the hope of healing, between backing down and continuing the fight. And as the days dragged on, she realized that her true battle wasn't with the judge or the town or the media, it was with herself. Could she overcome her own fear? Could she find the courage to rise above the doubt and the uncertainty? Only time would tell. Emily's mother's condition had worsened over the last few days, and the weight of the situation now hung over Emily like a dark cloud. The reality of her mother's fragile health had become impossible to ignore. With each passing hour, it seemed as though the hope that Emily had clung to was slipping further away. The situation had grown desperate. There was no more time to wait. The moment of truth had arrived, and Emily was about to face the ultimate test. The judge, a stern figure whose reputation for skepticism had spread far and wide, stood in the center of the crowded room. His eyes were cold and calculating, fixed on Emily with an expectation that felt almost unbearable. He had witnessed countless individuals claiming extraordinary powers, only to see them falter in the face of scrutiny. Now, he was determined to put Emily to the test. The crowd that surrounded them was a mixture of curious onlookers, hardened skeptics, and those hoping for a miracle. Their whispers filled the air, a low hum of doubt and anticipation. "Demonstrate your healing powers," the judge demanded, his voice clear and unwavering. "Heal your mother, right here, right now. If you truly possess this gift, prove it to all of us." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the request settled upon her. She had never intended for this moment to happen in front of so many people, with their eyes scrutinizing her every move. Her mother, once so full of life, now lay motionless in a chair beside her, pale and fragile. Emily had healed her mother countless times in private through quiet moments of prayer and touch, but this was different. This was an audience. A judge. A world that was ready to tear her apart if she failed. Desperation crept into her thoughts, and in that moment, she made a decision. She had no choice but to try. Her mother needed her, and the world needed to see that she was capable of something extraordinary. Emily nodded to the judge, swallowing her fear, and knelt down beside her mother. The room fell silent. Everyone watched with bated breath. Emily placed her hands gently on her mother's frail shoulders and closed her eyes, focusing all of her energy on the task at hand. She felt a surge of warmth flow through her palms, a familiar sensation she had come to associate with her healing abilities. But as she concentrated, something was different. The warmth didn't spread as it usually did. The connection she felt with her mother, once so strong and immediate, seemed distant. No matter how hard she tried, the healing power did not manifest in the way she had hoped. Minutes passed, and nothing changed. Her mother's breathing remained shallow, her skin still cold and clammy. The crowd, initially quiet, began to murmur among themselves. Skepticism filled the room. The judge's face remained impassive, but Emily could see the faintest trace of doubt in his eyes. The crowd's whispers soon turned to jeers. "Fraud," someone shouted from the back of the room. Another voice joined in, "She's no healer, just a charlatan." Emily's heart sank. The voices were like daggers, each one a sharp reminder of the pressure she was under. The laughter of the judge, once so distant, now rang in her ears, louder than all the voices around her. It was cruel, mocking, and filled with contempt. Emily's chest tightened with panic. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But there was no escape from this moment. Doubt crept into her mind, and for a fleeting second, she considered whether maybe they were right. Perhaps she wasn't capable of what she had claimed. Perhaps she had been fooling herself all along. Her hands, still resting on her mother's shoulders, began to tremble. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her all at once. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something shifted inside her. It was like a flicker of light breaking through the darkness of her self-doubt. She remembered the times she had healed her mother in the quiet of their home, when no one else was watching, when there were no judges or crowds to impress. It wasn't the power that mattered. It was the belief. It was the deep, unwavering connection she shared with her mother, the love that flowed between them. That was what made the healing possible. Not the fear of failure, not the desire to prove herself, but the simple, pure intention to help someone she loved more than anything. Emily's breath steadied, and she began to focus not on the judgmental eyes around her, but on the bond she had with her mother. Her mother's face, pale and worn, was still filled with traces of kindness, of a life well lived. Emily's heart swelled with love for the woman who had given her everything, who had always been there for her. This was not about the crowd. This was not about the judge. This was about her mother, and she would not let doubt win. She closed her eyes again and took a deep breath, pushing aside the jeers and the judge's laughter. She placed her hands back on her mother's shoulders, but this time, her focus was different. She no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. She no longer felt the need to rush. She just needed to be present, to believe, to care. She focused on the warmth she knew existed between them, the connection that transcended time and circumstance. As she did so, something remarkable happened. The warmth she had been struggling to summon spread through her palms, gentle and steady. It wasn't a surge of power, but a quiet, persistent energy. Her mother's breath began to deepen, her skin warming under Emily's hands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the color returned to her mother's cheeks. Emily's heart surged with hope, but she did not look up. She did not look at the crowd or the judge. She kept her focus on her mother, on the love that had always been the source of her strength. The room was silent now, the jeers replaced with a stunned stillness. Emily opened her eyes and saw her mother's eyes flutter open, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The change was subtle, but it was real. Her mother's condition hadn't transformed miraculously in an instant, but Emily could see the difference. And in that moment, she realized that the healing was never about a dramatic display of power. It was about belief. It was about connection. This was the turning point for Emily. She had faced her fear, her doubts, and the skepticism of the world, and she had chosen to believe in herself, regardless of what others thought. In doing so, she had discovered that the true source of her power was not her ability to heal, but her unwavering belief in herself and in the love she shared with her mother. And that belief was enough. The weight of Emily's failure presses down on her like a heavy cloak, suffocating her. The failed demonstration, once intended to be a moment of hope, has become the turning point that shifts the entire town's perception of her. The streets that had once offered passing glances of curiosity now seem to pulse with judgment, their eyes turning away as she walks by. The laughter that had once been faint now rings in her ears, mocking her with every step. The judge's cruel words echo relentlessly, reminding her that the very people she sought to help now see her as nothing more than a charlatan. The town, once a community that had watched her with cautious optimism, has now turned its back on her. The mocking whispers follow her everywhere, growing louder with each passing day. She can feel their eyes on her even when she's alone, the disapproval thick in the air like a tangible presence. Every attempt she makes to reach out to others is met with cold indifference or open disdain. People cross the street to avoid her, or worse, they turn their heads away, pretending they don't see her. The sting of their rejection cuts deeper than any words could. The judge's mocking laughter haunts her especially. His voice rings in her ears even in the silence of her room. "What did you expect, Emily? he had said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Did you think they'd just fall at your feet and worship you? No one's going to believe in magic, not here. His words strike like a slap, reminding her of her own naivete, of her belief that her abilities could somehow transcend the skepticism of others. Now, all she feels is the weight of her failure, and the more she tries to fight it, the more it seems to consume her. The doubts she had pushed aside for so long now come rushing back, flooding her mind. Did she make a mistake by revealing her abilities? Was it arrogance that drove her to think she could do something that no one else could? She questions whether she truly possesses the power she once believed in, or if it was all just a lie she told herself to give her hope. Every failed attempt, every disappointed face, only adds to the growing sense of doubt that clings to her like a shadow. Her mother's condition continues to worsen, and the pressure weighs on Emily's heart with each passing day. She sees the toll it's taking, her mother growing weaker, her body slowly fading away, and feels the crushing weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. The desperation to save her mother had driven Emily to try so hard, to expose herself in a way she never had before, but now it feels like a cruel joke. Her mother, once vibrant and full of life, is now a shadow of her former self, slipping further and further away. Emily feels powerless in the face of it, unable to reverse the damage, unable to stop the inevitable. Her frustration builds, an ever-present force in her mind. She had hoped, at least, that the demonstration would be her moment of vindication, a chance to prove to herself and others that she could make a difference. But now, instead of the recognition she had imagined, she is left with nothing but the echoes of her failure. It's as if the entire town has written her off, and she's not sure if she can blame them. She had set herself up for something impossible, and now it feels like the whole world is telling her that she was foolish to believe she could succeed. Emily retreats inward, pulling herself away from the world around her. She no longer seeks out the eyes of others, afraid of what she might see. She stays hidden in her small, dimly lit room, her gaze distant, lost in thought. The outside world feels foreign now, as if she no longer belongs to it. She struggles to reconcile the public humiliation with her own beliefs about her abilities, her own inner truth. Was she wrong to think she could heal her mother, to believe she had something worth sharing with the world? The doubt gnaws at her, a constant, unrelenting presence. At times, she considers giving up. The idea of walking away from it all, of retreating into a quiet life where she doesn't have to face the ridicule and disappointment, is tempting. She wonders if it would be easier to let her mother's condition run its course, to accept the inevitable instead of fighting against it. But even as the thought crosses her mind, she feels the sting of guilt. How can she give up on her mother when she's the one person who has always believed in her? How can she let herself fail her when her mother's life is hanging in the balance? The guilt only deepens the frustration she feels. She can't escape the feeling that she's letting everyone down, especially her mother. Every day, as her mother's condition deteriorates, Emily feels as if the clock is ticking louder in her ears, each tick reminding her of the time slipping away. She knows that she needs to act, that she needs to find a way to make her powers work, but the more she tries, the more elusive they become. The harder she pushes, the more distant they seem, as though her abilities have vanished entirely. As the days drag on, Emily's emotions become a tangled mess of shame, anger, and fear. Shame for having failed, anger at herself for believing that she could succeed, and fear that she may never be able to heal her mother or prove herself to anyone. She is torn between the desire to fight and the desire to give up, unsure of which path will lead her to peace. She doesn't want to let her mother down, but she doesn't know if she has the strength to keep going. In the quiet of her room, she stares at the small vial of herbs her mother had once used, a symbol of the love and hope that had guided her in the past. It's a fragile reminder of what she is fighting for, but it also feels like a symbol of her failure. She wonders if it's too late to try again, if she can somehow find the courage to stand up in the face of all the doubt and ridicule. But with each passing moment, the weight of her failure presses down harder, and she wonders if she has it in her to keep going. The emotional toll of her journey has left her at a crossroads. She doesn't know where to turn or what to do next. All she knows is that the stakes are higher than ever, and with each failure, the road ahead seems more uncertain. In the midst of her doubt, Emily is forced to confront the painful truth, that the battle to save her mother may be one she is not yet ready to win. Emily retreats into the solitude of her small town, her footsteps soft against the quiet streets as she walks away from the center of attention. The weight of her failure presses down on her chest, an invisible burden she cannot shake. It was supposed to be different this time. She had hoped that her abilities could make a difference, that her efforts could provide the solution to her mother's suffering. But the world's skepticism and her own insecurities had crushed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She thought she had found the strength to step into the light, to use her talents to heal and help. Instead, she finds herself retreating back into the shadows, unable to confront the emotions that have followed her all her life. As she withdraws from the public eye, the town seems to close in around her. The familiar faces of neighbors and friends no longer offer comfort, only reminders of her perceived failure. She avoids eye contact, keeps to the quiet corners of her home, and spends most of her time in the solitude of her room, where no one can question her, challenge her, or judge her. Yet, in these moments of silence, Emily starts to confront something deeper than just the external pressures she faces. She faces the truth about herself, about why she's always held back, why she's never allowed herself to truly stand out or be seen for who she is. Throughout her life, Emily had always felt like an outsider, even among those closest to her. She had hidden her abilities for as long as she could remember, afraid that if she allowed anyone to see them, they would think her strange, dangerous, or foolish. Her gifts had always felt like a curse, something she couldn't control, something that set her apart from the world in a way that felt isolating rather than empowering. She had learned to silence them, to bury them deep inside herself, believing that if she ignored them, they would go away. But they never did. The longer she tried to suppress them, the louder they became, until they manifested in ways she couldn't deny. Now, after the failure of her attempt to help her mother, those gifts feel more like a burden than ever. She had tried to use them for something good, to heal the woman she loved most in the world, but her attempt had only led to disappointment and rejection. It wasn't just the skeptics or the people who doubted her, it was her own fear that kept her from fully embracing who she was. She wanted to heal, to make a difference, but every time she tried, something inside her pulled back, convinced that her efforts would be in vain. She was afraid of the world's judgment, but more than that, she was afraid of the judgment that she had internalized, the harsh criticism of her own self-doubt. This internal conflict comes to a head in her moments of solitude. She begins to realize that the greatest obstacle in her life isn't the people who doubted her abilities. It wasn't even her mother's illness, though that had weighed heavily on her heart. The true barrier to her growth was something more fundamental, her own lack of faith in herself. She had spent so much of her life doubting her worth, questioning whether she had the right to pursue her gifts or if she was just fooling herself. Every failure, every setback, reinforced this belief that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't worthy of the things she longed for. The voices of others had become so loud in her head that she could no longer hear her own. It's in this painful realization that Emily begins to see the true source of her struggle. The world may have its doubts, but it's her own doubt that has kept her from reaching her full potential. She had always been afraid of standing out, afraid of what others might think, but now she understands that the real danger lies in staying small, in refusing to embrace her own power. She begins to understand that in order to help others, she first needs to trust herself. She needs to stop hiding, stop second-guessing, and start believing in her own ability to make a difference. With this new understanding, Emily makes a decision. She begins to practice again, but this time with a shift in focus. She no longer practices to prove something to others, to earn their approval, or to meet their expectations. Instead, she practices for herself. She practices for the connection she shares with her mother, for the love she has for the woman who has always been there for her, even when Emily felt like an outsider. She practices to remind herself of her own purpose, her own unique ability to heal. Her focus changes, and in that shift, something inside her begins to unlock. As Emily practices, she learns to silence the external voices, the critics, the doubters, the people who questioned her every move. She starts to focus on the one voice that truly matters, her own. She listens to herself, to the rhythms of her abilities, to the way they move through her, and she allows herself to trust in the process. No longer does she feel the need to prove her worth to anyone. She no longer feels like an imposter in her own life. She begins to heal, not just her mother, but herself, as well. Every note she sings, every movement she makes, is a step toward reclaiming her sense of self, a reminder that she is capable, that she is enough. In this chapter, Emily's growth becomes clear. She has always been driven by a deep desire to help others, but it is only when she begins to trust herself that she finds the strength to do so. She learns that true healing comes not from seeking approval or validation from others, but from believing in her own worth and embracing her unique gifts. Her journey toward self-acceptance is not easy, but it is the key to her ability to help others in a way that is authentic and powerful. Emily's transformation is subtle but profound. She doesn't immediately solve all of her problems, and she doesn't have all the answers, but she takes the first crucial step toward believing in herself. It's in these quiet moments of reflection and practice that Emily begins to find the peace she has been seeking, a peace that comes from within, from knowing that she is enough, just as she is. This shift in perspective doesn't erase the challenges she faces, but it changes how she approaches them. With her newfound faith in herself, Emily steps into the world with a quiet confidence, ready to face whatever comes next with the strength of someone who finally knows her own worth. Emily stood before the mirror, her reflection a quiet testament to the journey she had taken, both the physical and emotional miles she had crossed. There was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a clarity that filled the space where once there had been uncertainty and fear. She had spent so much time trying to navigate the expectations of others, pleasing those who doubted her, seeking approval from those who had questioned her abilities. But now, she knew something had shifted within her. The time for playing by the rules was over. It was time to make her own. She was no longer concerned with public spectacle or recognition. She had been tempted, at one point, to turn her healing into something grand, a statement that would catch the world's attention. After all, healing a mother like hers, with all the complexity of her condition, was no small feat. It could have been a moment for Emily to shine, to prove that she was capable of something extraordinary in front of everyone. But as she looked deeper inside herself, she realized that this mission was never about what others would see or think. It had always been about her mother and the quiet, sacred bond between them. She didn't need an audience, she needed only her love, her conviction, and the people who truly cared for her. The decision to heal her mother privately wasn't an easy one. Emily had spent countless nights lying awake, thinking about what the world would think. She had imagined the thrill of standing in front of a crowd, performing a public spectacle of healing that would sweep through the crowd like wildfire. Yet, as tempting as that might have been, she understood the fragility of what she was about to do. Her mother's condition was delicate, both physically and emotionally. The process of healing wasn't something that could be rushed or forced, and the judgment of others would only add to the weight of an already heavy burden. Instead, Emily chose to step away from the prying eyes and find the solitude in which she could perform the healing. She would gather only those closest to her, the ones who believed in her, the ones who had been there through the darkest days. This was a deeply personal act, one of love, not performance. She had nothing to prove to the world, only to herself and her mother. This would be an intimate affair, one where each moment could be felt in its rawest form. The anticipation weighed heavily on her as she prepared. Every step felt significant, every choice more deliberate. She had always relied on external validation, whether it was from her peers, mentors, or even the public. But now, for the first time, Emily was acting on her own instincts. She would take charge of her destiny, healing her mother in a way that felt authentic to her, not to the expectations of those around her. With her plan now firmly in place, Emily found herself standing before the judge once more. He had been her constant adversary throughout this journey, challenging her every step, questioning her motives, and trying to steer her toward what he deemed was the right way. His words were always sharp, calculated, and aimed at making her doubt her abilities. He represented the world's skepticism, the voice of reason that often told her to be careful, to question her intentions. But this time, Emily wasn't going to back down. She stood tall in front of him, her voice steady as she spoke. "I'm not here to win your approval," she told him, her tone clear, unwavering. "What I'm about to do has nothing to do with you or anyone else. It's about doing what I believe is right for my mother. This is my decision. My mission." The judge looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Emily could feel the weight of his judgment upon her. She had always sought his approval, wanted his respect, and feared his disapproval. But now, those fears had melted away. She wasn't seeking anything from him anymore, she had found her own path. Her words hung in the air, unapologetic, and without hesitation. The judge's gaze softened for the first time in weeks. He didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Emily knew he still didn't fully believe in her, still questioned the method and the outcome of what she was about to do. But that was okay. She didn't need him to believe in her anymore. She had learned to believe in herself. Her preparations were now complete. She had everything she needed for the healing, but more importantly, she had gathered her inner strength. The tools, her knowledge, her skills, and her love were now all she needed. Her mother would be the center of it all, and Emily would stand as the pillar of support, the one who could give her mother the strength to heal. It was no longer about proving something to the world or overcoming doubt. It was about honoring the deep, unspoken connection between a mother and her child. As Emily left the judge's presence, she felt a profound sense of calm settle over her. She had done what she needed to do, she had prepared, she had chosen her course, and she was ready. There would be no more second guessing, no more wondering if she was on the right path. This was her moment, and it was as quiet and personal as it needed to be. There would be no applause, No cheering crowd. There would only be her mother's breath, steady and slow, and the profound silence between them as Emily worked to heal what was broken. The next day, Emily entered her mother's room. The soft light of dawn filled the space, casting gentle shadows across the walls. Her mother lay on the bed, her frailty evident, but there was a tenderness in her gaze as she looked up at Emily. There was trust there, something that had always been a part of their relationship, even when words failed them. In that moment, Emily knew that this was not just about the physical act of healing. It was about love, about presence, about being there in a way that transcended everything else. Emily's heart raced as she began, her hands steady despite the weight of the task before her. She spoke softly, words of comfort and encouragement, as she moved with precision and care. Her thoughts were clear, her intentions pure. She wasn't thinking about the outcome, wasn't worried about whether others would understand. She was here for her mother, and that was enough. As she worked, Emily's sense of peace grew. The process was slow, but the connection she felt with her mother deepened with every passing moment. This was her final attempt to heal her mother, and it was the most powerful one yet, an act of faith, of love, of quiet confidence. No longer concerned with others' perceptions, Emily embraced her gift and took full control of her destiny. The room was bathed in soft light, a quiet stillness that seemed to hold the world outside at bay. Emily knelt beside her mother, her hands resting gently on her shoulders, her heart beating with a mixture of hope, fear, and determination. Her mother lay there, pale and frail, the effects of her illness etched deeply into her features. The years of struggle, the days spent in pain, had taken their toll. Yet, in this moment, everything seemed to quiet down as Emily focused all her energy on the task at hand. The bond between them was palpable, an invisible thread that connected their hearts. It was this connection, this deep love and unspoken understanding that Emily had come to realize was the source of her gift. She had always known there was something special about her, a power that set her apart, but it wasn't until now, in this quiet room, with her mother lying so vulnerable before her, that she truly understood the nature of that power. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. The room seemed to hum with an energy she could almost feel in the air around her. Emily's palms tingled as she focused her mind, pushing all her fear and doubt aside. There was no room for uncertainty now. Her mother needed her, and Emily had to believe in her ability to heal. As she placed her hands on her mother's body, a soft warmth began to emanate from her palms. At first, it was faint, a barely perceptible sensation, but it was there. Emily could feel it. She focused more intently, envisioning a soft, golden light flowing from her heart and into her hands. She imagined that light entering her mother's body, sweeping away the darkness, the illness, the pain. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Emily poured all her love, her belief, and her strength into the healing process. She could feel her energy being drained, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her mother's labored breathing was the only sound in the room, and it drove Emily forward. Each breath her mother took seemed to signal progress, however small. It was slow at first, but there was movement, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The room began to feel less heavy, less oppressive, and more alive with possibility. Then, a change. A soft sigh escaped from her mother's lips. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she noticed her mother's fingers twitch, a faint sign of life returning. The color in her mother's cheeks deepened ever so slightly, and her breathing grew more regular, less strained. Emily felt a surge of hope rush through her, and with it came a new wave of energy. She focused even harder, sending everything she had, every ounce of love, every prayer, every thought of hope into the healing process. For the first time in what felt like years, Emily's mother opened her eyes. The faint glimmer of recognition, the spark of life, returned to them. Her lips moved, though the words were soft and barely audible. "Emily, you're doing it?" The words were more than just a statement. They were a reminder, a validation of everything Emily had come to believe. This power, this ability, wasn't just something she had been given. It was something she had earned through the strength of her heart, through the unbreakable connection with her mother. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. The healing wasn't complete, and there was still work to be done. But she could feel the transformation, slow and steady, unfolding beneath her fingertips. Her mother's body seemed to be responding to the energy flowing through her. Her skin warmed, the tension in her muscles eased, and the lines of pain that had been carved into her face began to soften. Outside the room, the world continued to turn. The town, once skeptical, had gathered in small groups, whispering, watching from a distance, unsure of what to believe. Emily had been an enigma to many. Her abilities had caused doubt and fear. The judge who had once dismissed her powers as nothing more than fantasy was now among those who quietly observed from the shadows. They had all witnessed the struggle, the years of illness, the desperate search for a solution. But what they hadn't anticipated was the quiet power of a daughter's love. The healer wasn't some distant, powerful figure with secret knowledge. She was a young woman, standing beside her mother, doing what anyone would do for the person they loved, trying to save her. And in that quiet, personal act, Emily was proving more than just her abilities. She was proving the power of the heart, the strength that came from the most human of connections. In the room, the air seemed to shift again. The weight of expectation was gone. There was no audience here, no judge to impress, no crowd to satisfy. The only thing that mattered was this moment, the space between Emily and her mother, the healing that had already begun. And then, it happened. Her mother's eyes fluttered open fully, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, her voice rang out clearly. "Emily, I feel better." The words were like a song to Emily's ears, sweet and simple but carrying with them a depth of meaning she couldn't fully express. The room was silent, save for her mother's soft breaths, and in that silence, the magnitude of the moment became apparent. Emily withdrew her hands, but she didn't step back. Instead, she held her mother's gaze, as if sharing this victory with her, as if acknowledging the journey they had both been on, the pain, the doubts, and now, this miraculous shift. Her mother, once frail and fragile, now seemed stronger, her eyes clearer, her body more relaxed. For Emily, the true healing had nothing to do with the physical transformation. It wasn't just about her powers or proving herself to anyone. It was about this, the deep, unshakable bond she shared with her mother, a bond that transcended illness and doubt. Her powers had been a manifestation of that connection. They had come not from some distant force or divine source, but from within her, a reflection of her love, her intention, and her unwavering belief in the possibility of healing. The room, once heavy with doubt and fear, now felt light, filled with a warmth that came from something far more powerful than just energy. It was the energy of love, of hope, and of the realization that true healing, whether of the body or the spirit, was not about proving something to the world, but about connecting with the people you loved most. Emily understood, in that quiet, transformative moment, that her powers were a gift, not because they allowed her to heal, but because they allowed her to give back what had always been there, a love that could transcend anything. With her mother fully recovered, Emily's world began to shift in subtle but profound ways. The recovery had been a long, hard road, but it was a testament to both the resilience of her mother and the strength Emily had found within herself during the process. The small town, which had once viewed her with skepticism and doubt, had slowly started to change their tune. The impossible had been proven possible. Her mother was alive, healthy, and thriving after a seemingly insurmountable illness. This miracle, however unspoken, was undeniable, and it began to soften the hearts of those who had once dismissed Emily and her unusual gift. Though the town's opinions were gradually shifting, the process was slow. There were still whispers behind closed doors, raised eyebrows, and skeptical glances whenever Emily passed by. The judgment she had once feared still lingered in the air like a shadow, but now it held less power over her. She was no longer the timid, insecure girl who had tried to hide her abilities and earn the approval of others. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger for it. Emily knew now that her worth wasn't defined by the opinions of those around her. The approval of others, once so important to her, was now a distant thought, replaced by an inner strength that couldn't be shaken. The judge, who had once been dismissive of Emily's potential, had changed in his own way. His previous comments about her unnatural gift had left Emily feeling as though she didn't belong in the world she was part of. But now, after witnessing her journey, her quiet determination, her mother's recovery, and the undeniable healing power Emily had shared with others, the judge had begun to speak to her with a new respect. He no longer saw her as a curiosity or a threat, but as a young woman who had found her place in a world that didn't fully understand her. Still, Emily didn't need his approval. She realized that she had never needed it. His respect was a mere byproduct of her growth, not the goal. Her mother, now healthy and vibrant once again, became a source of encouragement and guidance. After months of being the one who needed care, she was now the one offering advice. It was an adjustment for both of them, but it was a sign of the emotional and physical healing that had taken place. Her mother encouraged Emily to embrace her gift fully, to use it to help others and to make the most of the opportunity she had been given. The suggestion was tempting, but Emily knew she wasn't ready to dive headfirst into that world. While Emily had come to terms with the fact that she could heal, that she had the power to make a difference, she had also learned that healing wasn't a one-size-fits-all process. She didn't need to rush into a life of using her gift to save everyone. There were still parts of her own heart and soul that needed time to heal, parts of her past that needed to be understood before she could fully share herself with others. Emily had learned that healing wasn't just a physical act, it was an emotional and spiritual journey that took time and patience. She wasn't afraid to take things at her own pace, and she wasn't going to allow anyone, not even her mother, to push her into something she wasn't ready for. As time passed, Emily found herself growing into a strong, self-assured young woman. She no longer walked with her head down, afraid of the world and its judgment. Instead, she held her head high, embracing her abilities and her uniqueness, knowing they were a part of who she was, but not the sole defining feature of her identity. She had realized that she was more than just her gift. Her strength, her courage, her kindness, these were the qualities that defined her. The gift was simply a tool, something she could use to help, but not something that should dictate the course of her life. This shift in her mindset was transformative. It allowed her to move beyond the self-doubt and insecurity that had once ruled her thoughts. Emily now had a quiet confidence in herself, a trust in her own ability to make decisions and chart her own path. She no longer felt the need to seek validation from others. The judgment, the expectations, the pressure to be something or someone she wasn't, it all became irrelevant. Emily had learned the most important lesson, that her true purpose was not to please others or to fit into their narrow definitions of what she should be. Her purpose was to follow her own path, to help those who truly needed it, but to do so on her own terms. This newfound understanding gave Emily a sense of peace. She had spent so long trying to live up to others' expectations, trying to be someone who could be accepted and loved. But now she knew that her worth was not tied to their approval. It was tied to the way she viewed herself and the choices she made. Her ability to heal wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility, one she could wield with grace and discretion, at her own pace and in her own way. As she sat in the quiet moments of reflection, Emily could feel the weight of her journey. The emotional scars of her past, the doubts, the fears, the questions had been replaced by a quiet strength. She had learned to listen to her own voice, to trust her instincts, and to honor her own boundaries. It was a freedom she had never known before. She didn't need to follow the path others expected of her. She didn't need to rush into anything. Emily was finally ready to embrace who she was, not as someone defined by the expectations of others, but as a person with her own dreams, her own direction, and her own purpose. Her abilities, once a source of confusion and fear, had become a part of her identity in a way that felt natural and grounded. She was no longer overwhelmed by the responsibility of healing others. Instead, she had come to understand that healing was a delicate, sacred act, one that she would offer when she felt it was right. She knew that she couldn't change the world on her own, but she also knew that her purpose wasn't about changing everyone's life. It was about making a difference where it mattered most, on her own terms, in her own time. The story closed with Emily standing at the threshold of a new chapter in her life. She had learned to find peace within herself, to embrace her abilities without fear or hesitation, and to chart a path that felt true to who she was. There was much more ahead of her, many challenges to face, but she was no longer afraid. Emily had found the courage to walk her own path, one that was uniquely hers, shaped by her experiences, her gift, and her heart.